I guess you were a young lad when the first wave of rock and roll happened, so you were right at the right age to witness it all. Who were the rock pioneers that really got your attention?
Sure. Well, my first rock heroes, of course, were the first generation of rock and rollers, Elvis and Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent and the Everly Brothers and Little Richard and the dangerous guys, the first ones. And I actually started playing guitar when I was 9 years old. That was in 1956. And so I learned everything I could on the radio. And started my first band when I was 12 and changed to electric guitar. And basically had my ear in a radio speaker my whole life. That was really my story. And I guess some guys are just more aggressive about it than others, and that really determines, I guess, who's going to go on.
Mm. How ambitious would you say you were in those early days? Did you have grand plans for stardom?
Well, the funny part is, I mean, every kid who starts out, it's like playing baseball. I mean, every kid who starts out thinks he's got a chance, and of course, once rock and roll became, an industry, it was an actual job opportunity, I suppose you could call it. And so, yeah, I mean, every kid dreams of doing that. You start out very tentatively, and as I did, playing, rock and roll dances in my hometown in Michigan, and just rolling the dice and seeing what happens. That's what everybody does.
You were not long out of school when you had your first hit, and at such a young age, was it difficult not to be overwhelmed by that sudden notoriety and fame?
Well, that's very true. In my case, I had recorded what turned out to be my first hit record, "Hanky Panky," back in 1964 in a radio studio in my hometown, Niles, Michigan, and as a favor to a disc jockey who was starting a little regional label, and took my cover band in there, the Shondells, and cut four sides, and one of them was Hanky Panky, and it was released locally and did okay. I was a junior in high school, and it did okay. It didn't blow the doors down, but we enlarged our territory a little bit, but we couldn't get any distribution or national airplay, so the record kind of died on us. And then in '65, I graduated from high school and took my band on the road, and we played all through the Midwest, Chicago, Rush Street, and finally, about March of 1966, we're playing a sort of a dumpy little club in Wisconsin, and right in the middle of my 2 weeks, the guy goes belly up. The IRS shut him down. And he hadn't paid his taxes, so we were sent home feeling like real losers. And so that's how the good Lord works, though, because as soon as I got home, this is March of '66, I got the call from Pittsburgh that changed my life. The Hanky Panky had been bootlegged in the city of Pittsburgh. Have no idea how it got there, and was sitting at number one in the city of Pittsburgh. They bootlegged it and sold 80,000 of them. And if I hadn't have been home at that exact moment, if that club hadn't have gone broke right at that moment, you and I wouldn't be talking here today because nothing would have happened for me. And that really began my career, because I went to Pittsburgh and sort of grabbed the first bar band I could find to be the Shondells. Couldn't put the original band back together, and 2 weeks later we're in New York signing with Roulette Records. So, and of course then Hanky Panky took off internationally at that point. So that's how my career started. So you're right, it was a whirlwind. It was really hard to fathom. You feel like you're in the eye of a hurricane, and that's how it was. I mean, the first 6 months of my career I was basically a spectator.
Now, with your deal with Roulette Records, we now know, thanks to your book, of its mob connections.
Right.
What were your first impressions of the people there?
Well, red lights should have been going on all over the place, but we didn't care. All we wanted to do was get a hit. When I came to New York, we went to all the record companies, and we were just thrilled because we got a yes from everybody. We got a yes from Columbia, RCA. Hanky Panky, of course, had been a regional breakout in Pittsburgh, a major market, so they were grabbing all the singles they could back then. Epic said yes, Atlantic said yes, and finally the last place we took the record to was Roulette. And, I'd heard rumors about Roulette, but, that we really weren't thinking of that because Roulette probably was not where we were going to go. We were probably going to go with Columbia, one of the corporate labels. And so I'm going to bed that night feeling so good, and the next day I wake up and we start getting calls from all the record companies that said yes the day before, saying, "Listen, we got to pass." I said, "What do you mean we got to pass? I thought we had a deal." And finally, Jerry Wexler at Atlantic told me the truth, that Morris Levy, the head of Roulette Records, had called all the other record companies and said, "This is my record. Back off," just like that, and scared them. And so that is quite literally how we ended up on Roulette. They basically, right from the get-go, just sort of overpowered everybody else. Even Columbia and RCA, which was amazing, and so we were sort of dumbfounded, but we ended up signing with Roulette. And of course, once we got up there, we realized what Roulette was. It took us, we learned it incrementally, that Roulette was not only a record company, but it was a front for the Genovese crime family in New York. And this came about after several weeks of seeing these really strange characters up there with boxes that would disappear, and all kinds of activity was going on up there other than the record business. So gradually we pieced it all together, and finally, we'd meet somebody in Morris's office. Morris himself was like right out of Central Casting. I mean, he was a gorilla, and he was just an amazing. You couldn't take your eyes off him, though. He was fascinating. And so, we'd meet somebody in Morris's office. He'd introduce us to somebody. And a week later, we'd see him on TV news, in handcuffs, being taken out of a warehouse in New Jersey somewhere. And this kept happening. And, we'd say, "Isn't that the guy we just met in Morris's office?" And it was. So this is how we learned. And so the book and our basic story is, about trying to have a career in the record business with this very dark and sinister and dangerous story going on behind us that we couldn't talk about.
Was the temptation there at any point to try and leave the label? And could you have left if you wanted to?
I'm not sure we could have, but we it's funny because that question came up constantly. Especially once we started having hits on Roulette, and we just kept having hit after hit on Roulette. Do we break it up, take our life in our hands maybe, and try to leave, or do we stick it out? Because we weren't getting paid mechanical royalties. That just wasn't going to happen, and we weren't getting paid songwriting royalties. So we were making money, of course, from other directions with BMI and touring and commercials and so forth. And we were doing fine there, but we were not getting mechanical royalties where Roulette just wasn't going to pay. So that was our constant question. Do we try to leave, or do we stick it out and keep going with it because we were having such great success? And I think we ended up making the right decision because we stayed. And despite all the craziness, we had great success on Roulette. We ended up selling 100 million records, more actually, and with 23 gold singles and 9 gold and platinum albums. So the statistics at Roulette Records were really amazing. So plus I get to tell this story now. That's the main thing. So I guess there is universal justice. We'll probably, it's so ironic that probably the biggest project I'm ever going to be involved in is the retelling of this story.
I'm guessing they weren't really music-related people at Roulette, so did they pretty much leave you to your own devices in terms of creative control?
They did. Excellent point. They really did. I was so thankful that they left us alone, because we were really in charge of our own career, almost right from the beginning. And even though Morris had pretty good ears, could hear hits, they were very singles-oriented. And the world was changing to albums at that point. And we basically were left in charge of producing, writing, album covers. I got an incredible education that I really couldn't have had anywhere else if we'd have gone with one of the corporate labels. I can tell you right now, we would have been, especially with a record like Hanky Panky, we would have been handed to an in-house producer. We would have been lost in the numbers, and Hanky Panky's probably the last time anybody would have heard from us. I think we would have been probably a one-hit wonder on Columbia.
Did at any point at your time at Roulette, did you feel in any physical danger? Did you feel
Over? Yes, very much so. There were several times we wrote about it in the book, but there were more times than that. We basically had every time money came up, it was dangerous. These guys weren't going to pay, and if you pushed it too far and complained too much, it was. They let us know right away what happened to Jimmy Rogers could happen to us. Jimmy Rogers was an artist on Roulette in the late 50s, had Honeycomb and several other big hit records. Went after his royalties and wouldn't stop, and basically was left for dead on an L.A. freeway in the middle 60s when he went to sue him. And he just by the grace of God survived, but he was never the same again. And they left him for dead. Mm-hmm. And I basically had to consider that every time we wanted to make a big strategic decision about money and about leaving, about any of that stuff. So, and we couldn't talk about it. That was the thing. It's not like anybody could help us, because no lawyer or accountant was going to challenge these guys. We certainly weren't, and as hysterically funny as some of the moments were up there with trying to have a career with these mob characters, it was also very scary. And so I try to straddle a fence on that in the book and really tell the story honestly. But on the other hand, if it hadn't have been for Roulette Records and Morris Levy, there wouldn't have been a Tommy James. Mm. So I always have to weigh those things. It's really a very schizophrenic bunch of feelings that I went through.
Yeah. I guess it would be a mammoth task to do so, but if you ever sat down and tried to put a dollar value on just how much money you were cheated out of in those days?
Well, we know it was between $30 and $40 million.
Wow.
And that was considerably a long time ago. So, I mean, this was, it was a lot. And plus the fact that there's all the writing and publishing monies that, on top of the record royalties. But, it's funny. I just really, I just have this almost spiritual feeling about it, that if I had had all that at the moment I had it, I probably could have killed myself very easily with the lifestyle I was leading back then. And I feel like, everything comes full circle, and that's what this story is, because this story now, the book, Me, the Mob, and the Music, is going to be, is in its 7th printing now. And I'm just really thrilled and amazed at the reaction of the fans and the media. But also, it's going to be a Broadway show and a movie.
Fantastic.
And Barbara DeFina, who has produced just a whole slew of movies with Martin Scorsese, is producing the movie. And she's also going to be producing the Broadway show. She produced Casino and Goodfellas and The Last Temptation of Christ, and going back to the 80s with The Color of Money, and just a lot of big smash hit movies. And so we're looking at about 2 years on the Broadway show, and probably another year after that on the movie. But that's how long it's going to take. They're both going to be developed at the same time, and of course they can't come out at the same time. We don't want them competing with each other. So anyway, as I say, the telling of this story is probably going to be the biggest project I've ever been involved in. So it's pretty ironic.
So with the book, I guess this is a story you've been sitting on for a long time. Was there a specific moment when you felt that the time was right to speak up and tell your true story?
Yes, when they all died. It's true. We started. Martin Fitzpatrick, my co-author, and I started the book to tell the story about 8 years ago, and we got about a third of the way into it, and it was going to be a nice. We were going to call it Crimson and Clover, and it was going to be a nice book about the writing of the hits and making of the records, a nice music kind of autobiography. But we got about a third of the way in and realized that if we don't tell the whole story, the roulette story, and really tell it, that we were cheating ourselves and everybody else. But I was very uncomfortable talking about this because at that time some of these guys were still walking around. And you just never know, the families and all that stuff. So we basically put it on a shelf for another couple of years, and then in early '06, the last of the roulette regulars, as I called them, passed away, and we felt that it was okay to go ahead and finish the story. So we did it in great detail, as much as we could. Really took our time with everything, and finally, last year, we finished it and immediately got a deal through Simon and Schuster, Scribner, and almost immediately after it was released, we started getting calls for the movie and the Broadway show. So it's a good thing we waited. I just feel that it was the right timing, and it was very therapeutic writing this, because for 45 years I couldn't talk about any of this. So this was, and of course, it's funny because it's the book itself is sort of a combination of the record business and the other business that was going on, and so I just they work together, but we just couldn't say a word about this for 40 years.
Since the book's release, has there been any feedback from surviving relatives of the people involved?
A few, yes, but all good, strangely enough. I had an incident we're just outside of New York, in New Jersey, is where my home is, and we were signing books down in southern New Jersey, and the son of one of the main figures, the mob figures in the book, came to see me, and I had no idea what was going to happen, but he loved the book, and asked me if I wanted to come to his studio, and I said, no, but thanks a lot. So anyway, and another incident when a niece, actually, of the head of the Genovese family came to see me with her husband, who just happened to be in waste management. This is a true story. And I'm signing books, and I want you to meet my husband, Nicky, in waste management. And, of course, I wanted to say, well, who did you waste, and how did you manage to stay out of jail? So anyway, but, it was sort of all in good spirits, and I really have not had a run-in with anybody, thankfully.
That's good. Let's talk about some music now. You successfully made that transition from chart-topping singles act to a successful album-orientated act. Were you able to sense a change in the wind, a wind of change coming through in music that enabled you to...
Sure.
Yeah?
Well, I often tell the Crimson and Clover story because it happened at exactly the right moment. And what I mean by that is we were out on the presidential campaign with Hubert Humphrey in 1968. And when we left to go on the campaign, it was like a tour. When we left, the biggest acts of the day were all singles acts. It was, us and the Rascals and the Association and I'm leaving a lot of people out, but it was all singles acts. I got back 90 days later, and it was all album acts. It was Joe Cocker, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Led Zeppelin, Blood, Sweat and Tears. And we knew out on that campaign that if we didn't sell albums, our career was basically over. And Roulette had never really sold a lot of albums. They sold their share, but it was basically albums as a result of the singles. And so we basically, thankfully, we're working on a record called Crimson and Clover at that moment. And Crimson and Clover allowed us to make that move from AM top 40 singles to progressive album-oriented rock. And allowed us, go from AM to FM at that moment, because that's who was playing the albums, was FM radio. So we were so thankful for that, because it really happened at the right moment and probably gave us the second half of our career. And Crimson and Clover, I can't think of any other single we ever worked on up to that point that would have done that for us in one shot like that.
Yeah, it's probably the pivotal piece of music in your career, I guess.
Yes. Well, it was certainly the one that allowed us to make the pivot from, AM to FM radio, which really gave us a whole new career. And so I was really very thankful for that.
I believe that the finished product of that recording, though, was very much an unfinished production. Is that right?
Well, yeah, that's actually true, because I never got a chance to mix the record. Crimson and Clover was one of those fluky records that, we just sort of did it from scratch by feel. We just felt our way along on that record. And when, Roulette had big plans to do a big mega release and was going to make a lot of noise, and I, like an idiot, when I finished the record, we hadn't mixed it yet, and I just, threw up a rough mix. I pretty much did with the soles of my feet, and just had a basic mix off the board that I was going to just refer to myself. And so I take it to Chicago. We're in Chicago the next day playing a concert, and I take it up to WLS, and I play it for John Brooke, the program director up there, who had broken a lot of records for us, and I asked him what he thought. And he goes, "Ooh, that's great." He says, that's a smash. And I was playing him the rough mix. So unbeknownst to me, he tapes my tape and tapes the thing, and I go down to the car, and I have WLS on, and as I'm getting into the car, I hear, "World exclusive on WLS." Oh, and I'm going, "Oh my God, he's playing the rough mix. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. We've blown the whole thing. He's playing this rough mix that, what am I going to do?" I get back to New York and the Roulette, and they're all going, "What happened? What did you do?" And I said, "Well, I just took it up and played it for the guy." And he's playing it every 20 minutes. And so Red Schwartz up at Roulette calls him and explains him what happened. And of course, the other radio station, 50,000 watt station in Chicago, was just fit to be tied. They were so angry at us they wouldn't play the record, so they played even more. And so I ended up having to release the rough mix. I never got a chance to mix the record. I had to release the rough mix of Crimson and Clover as it is, and the version we all know today is that rough mix. That's a true story.
That's a great story. And another hit of yours, Crystal Blue Persuasion, I guess was the reverse, where I think originally it was a big full-on production, but you stripped it down.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said. Boy, you did your homework. That's right. Well, yeah, Crystal Blue was really I don't say the hardest record we ever made, simply because we had completely overproduced it. It just, when we got done with the record, we listened to it and said, "You know what? That's not Crystal Blue Persuasion anymore." We had too many guitars, we had a full set of drums, we had 2 or 3 keyboards, and it just, when we were done with the record, it just didn't work for any of us. And so we spent the next 3 weeks unproducing the record and pulling things out until the only thing left was a conga drum and a flamenco guitar and one tremolo guitar and basically no drums at all. There were no drums at all there were in that record other than a bongo and a conga. And then we had to let it breathe and to bring it back to life, you know. And then it worked.
So did you notice a change in the demographics of your audience by this time?
Well, yeah, you know, we were very lucky because we really were straddling the fence because, you know, we had sort of the AM teenage crowd, and we also had the more progressive fans on FM, and what they called underground radio at the time. So we were really lucky. We were a pop act. A lot of pop acts tried making that move and weren't successful at it. And so we were really lucky to do it right then, because so many of my friends, there was this mass extinction of singles acts in late '68 and '69, and thankfully we weren't one of them.
Now, I'm sure this is a story you've told a million times, but have you ever pondered how the following years would have turned out for you had you turned up at Woodstock? And not
Well, I don't know. You know, it's funny. I think I've gotten more mileage out of the story that we didn't play Woodstock. What happened was we were in Hawaii at the time, and I get a call from my secretary that Artie Kornfeld, who was a good friend of mine, producer, produced a lot of rock acts, and one of the principal promoters of Woodstock had asked if we would come up and play it. And the way it was put to me, my secretary said to me, "Tom, listen, Artie was up. He said, they're going to have this big gig at a pig farm in upstate New York. You want to play the gig?" And I said, "What did you say? Did you say pig farm?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I say there's going to be a lot of people there, though." And I said, "Wait a minute, you want me to leave Paradise, fly 6,000 miles back to New York, and play a pig farm? Is that what you just said?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if we're not there, go ahead and start without us." And I hang up the phone, and they did, and it was called Woodstock. But I think I've gotten probably more mileage out of the story over the years than if we'd actually done it. So
that's probably the ultimate compliment for a songwriter.
We actually played there. We actually played there about 3 months ago. We played Bethel Arena, but it's right on the Woodstock site.
Oh, really?
And 40 years later, I ended up going back to Woodstock. So
better late than never, hey?
Yeah, that's right.
It's probably the ultimate compliment for a songwriter to have their songs covered by others, and you've been given that compliment many, many times. Any personal favourites?
Oh, yeah. You know, you're right, and I feel I'm so flattered and honored every time a group does one of our songs. I mean that too, because you know it's just we've had over 300 major cover versions done by everyone from REM to the Boston Pops, you know, and so I'm really very flattered by it. REM did a great job at Dragon Line. They come to mind. Prince did an amazing job last year on Crimson and Clover. Had a #1 record with it. His first digital album, all digital, no pieces at all, no tangible pieces. And oh man, I mean, I've had one of my favorites was a British group called Tight Fit that did Mony Mony, and even though Mony Mony's, you know, there've been bigger records of Mony Mony, Tight Fit did one of the best jobs I ever heard. And so, you know, the fans sometimes I think have a tougher time with it than I do because everybody makes the comparisons between the original records. But I'm just, I'm glad because it keeps the music in front of people and, you know, keeps it going.
Now, around 1970, you had success as a songwriter and producer with a band called Alive and Kicking and a song Tighter Tighter. But you originally intended to record that one yourself. What happened with that?
That's right. Well, I you know, it was in that moment after the Shondells and I parted company. We didn't part enemies or anything. They were going in one direction, I was going in another, and we just, wanted to take 6 months off because everybody was so exhausted, and we were going to get back together, and then we just never did. And in that 6-month period, this group, Alive and Kickin', came to me, and I originally was writing Tighter, Tighter for me. And I went in the studio, I did a track, went in the studio, and I just didn't like the way I was doing it. It just didn't sound right. And right at that moment, I got a call from Alive and Kickin', would you be interested in doing it? So they were a guy and a girl lead singer, and so I rewrote the song as a duet and brought them into the studio and put them on the track that I had already done. And we added their guitar player and keyboard player and a few other things. And I sang one of the background parts, and we just threw the thing together, and it sounded great with their voices on it. And I took it back to Roulette, and they put it out, and it ended up being a #1 record, and it was the first outside production I had ever done. And so that was really great. I mean, that's just kind of how things happened back then. Nothing was planned. It just kind of worked out that way.
So, Tommy, after all these years, what's your key to longevity in the music business?
Wow. Well, there's just a lot of good energy around our music. I feel that way, for example, about the Beach Boys music and the Beatles music and so many of the other acts that have been around a long time. Just a lot of good feeling around it. And I really thank the good Lord and the fans for the kind of longevity we've had. I really do mean that. I never in a million years thought I'd still be doing rock and roll 45 years later, really. And, we tour every year. We're also in the middle of, we have our own label, and we release product as we want to. But the record business is such a different place now than it ever has been before. And the record business itself is going through a lot of changes, what we call the record business, the music business. And so I don't know where this is all going to end. I know that we're getting involved more and more with theatrical works like film and television, and the next 3 years are going to be very interesting with the Me, the Mob, and the Music project. And so it's going to. My guess is that Broadway theater is going to be like the new albums,
Yeah.
and because we have new songs in Me, the Mob, and the Music. We have 8 new songs in addition to the hits. So I'm sure that it's going to be a conglomeration of all these things. Plus the fact, I really believe as high-def TV and it becomes more and more a part of our life, I really think we're going to see a huge move of the music business to television, because that's where the people are.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to probably end up with a combination of television and music. I don't mean like MTV. I mean channels devoted to certain. I think we're going to see a Sony channel, probably a Warner Brothers channel, and new music. Getting new music in front of the fans today is one of the biggest challenges there is, because as great as the internet is, the numbers just don't equal what the old numbers used to be. In other words, the number of people who, you don't type a name into a computer that you never heard of, and getting new product in front of the fans in some kind of rotation like radio used to do is going to be one of the greatest challenges we have, because downloading just isn't quite there yet. The numbers aren't there yet. That's going to change as it gets bigger and bigger, but we still have to come up with a way of previewing new music in a meaningful way where people are able to hear it more than once.
Yeah. Hey, Tommy, got to thank you so much for being so generous with your time so early in the morning over there for you. It's been
my pleasure, really. It was great that you certainly asked all the right questions, so thank you.
Look, we love the book, and the theatre show sounds really exciting, and we really can't wait to see that movie. That's some exciting times ahead.
Well, thank you so very much, John.
Pleasure speaking with you, Tommy. Thank you.
You take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.